Afternoon, everybody who has just joined us. We're just waiting for a few extra people to come on board. As I was explaining to Jeremy, you won't be able to see me, which is a terrible shame because I've done something to my my logistics with my Zoom, and it's saying computer says no to video, but you'll just have to do with my beautiful voice, which I'm sure most of you recognise. But Jeremy Schluter here from Hassell is online, so he's actually going to be doing most of the talking today, which is good. So you don't really need to see me at all. I'm just going to be the conduit, you might say. So Jeremy, tell me what's been happening for you guys. What's going on? Anything interesting?
Oh, lots going on. Lots going on. I've just finished a secondment. I've spent most of this year working out of our Sydney studio on the Harbourside redevelopment with Mirvac, which is a 0.5 kilometre long piece of waterfront in Darling Harbour next to the ICC. And I've now come back to the Melbourne studio, but flying around and yeah, really keeping in touch with what's happening in the residential market. Lots of interesting things happening. It's a challenging time for apartments, but also with challenges come great opportunity. And so there's lots of great opportunities happening as well.
Now, I am going to mute you guys. Don't take it personally. It's just when we have a number of people in the room, what actually happens is we have a bit of feedback as we just witnessed them, which is not pleasant on the ear. So are we, like, it's interesting, and I'm sure you'll touch on this, but we might as well have a bit of a gas bag while we're waiting for people to join us. Are we finding that, you know, is the construction cost as deadly as everyone's making out to be in terms of actually people actually obviously putting off doing any kind of construction because it's just become too untenable at the moment, Jeremy?
That is really a case-by-case basis, and it's geographically specific. So I know from Pete Lee in our WA studio, there are real challenges, and it is a real barrier to getting construction projects up off the ground. When you've got construction costs in Perth that are more expensive than what they are in Sydney, that is no doubt a challenge to getting apartment projects up and off the ground. What we're finding on the eastern states is that builders and contractors are finding clever ways around that. We're diversifying our supply chains so that we're not so reliant only on China. And there's some local manufacturing coming into play, and the industry is innovating at breakneck speed to try and manage that challenge. And I think the rising prices is helping that a little bit. So projects are still happening here, and you'll see there's a chart we've got with the rate of apartment construction starts is accelerating or is increasing on a trajectory. But we're still have a shortfall with our supply targets. I know there was a UDIA report came out, and even in the last day or two, that said New South Wales need to build 25,000 new apartments in addition to the current supply, just in order to meet the housing demand in that state. Yeah, the supply of apartments is a real challenge. I'd say more than the construction cost in the eastern states.
Well, we're always going to take a bit of the UDIA or Property Council with a pinch of salt, aren't we? We need 25,000. I'm not
have an interest.
Sure. Yeah, there's a vested interest in them saying that. All right. So what we're going to do, Jeremy, is because I'm conscious of time, and we are 2:33 or 5:33 starting time, so we'll get going. So welcome everybody. Samantha Reece from the Australian Apartment Advocacy. The future of apartments, this really does interest me, and we were very lucky to actually have Peter Lee speak at a conference last year about this topic. And so I said to Jeremy, we must do this for general purposes. And so Jeremy has actually updated it since then, which is great. He's going to do the bulk of the hard push this afternoon. He's got a lot of slides there, people, so I'm suggesting that you buckle in. If you haven't got a caffeine hit or a glass of wine, go and get it now. because once Jeremy gets started, you're not going to want to miss what he has to say. So obviously, the Australian Apartment Advocacy, we've been around for 6 years for our sins, and so we'll go back to what we were saying, that the Australian Apartment Advocacy is the voice for 2.5 million people who choose apartments, and I'm assuming that that includes you on the channel with us at the moment. We educate, we advocate, we call for greater consumer protection, and we certainly like to think that we are leaders in the sector. And certainly Hassell is one of our sponsors, which is Butte, and that allows us to actually then tap into all that intelligence that they have to share. So Jeremy, are you there? Do you want to keep?
Yes. Let's get into it.
Great.
We're doing that. I might do an acknowledgement of country, Sam, because I think what Hassell is finding globally is that we really take seriously the traditional custodians of the land on which we work around Australia, around the world. Here I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, emerging. Their tens of thousands of years of continuous culture provide a richness to Australia and to our projects, and their history of telling stories has a real power that we're finding and enjoying. So I pay my respects to them before we get going.
Do you know what's happened? I actually had it at the end of the of the PowerPoint. So let me just share my screen. So I do apologise for this, Jeremy. We will get there, darling. And yes, I think that what we're seeing at the moment, which is fantastic, is the influence from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in terms of then our culture, in terms of then design. I think it's never been embraced as much as it is at the moment. Correct?
Absolutely. And it's a point of difference in Australia. That's something we do better than anyone else in the world from some of our global practices that we collaborate with. So let's crack in, because as you said, there's a lot to get through. A snapshot of where we're at. COVID-19 has changed our cities, our homes, our offices, and our worlds. There's no turning back. In some respects, the pandemic is a thing of the past, but it's still impacting the changes that the market is seeing, that purchasers, residents are wanting, and it will, there's no going back to what it was before. There's also global instability. So, and we all know what's causing these, but that's having an impact on energy supply and costs. The world is on edge as it faces the challenge, and that has an impact on a discerning market. That's also impacted by the cost of living crisis. So costs going up, interest rates, labour shortages, rising power prices and inflation. That is disproportionately impacting the lower socioeconomic spectrum. So housing supply and access is a really important theme that more and more developers and designers are dealing with, which is important to note. But it also amplifies the discerning market and that flight to quality, because when budgets are tight, people want to make sure what they're spending on, they're getting quality for. So people are more demanding than they have been in a while, we're finding.
I've been doing my research, and that's definitely the case. And what's interesting is that, in 2035, if we're looking that far ahead, it will be the alpha generation will be the first-home buyers, which are in fact my teenagers. And of course, that's a scary concept, because they're all about the brand and they're all about the now.
They are, but they're also, the brand is about quality, is about lifestyle, is about what they're getting. So they are also hypersensitive to the quality they're getting. We all know there's a climate crisis, a climate challenge that's in sharp focus. On the left is in Pakistan, where 1/3 of that entire country was underwater because of the floods. That is a massive stat, an entire 1/3 of that country underwater. We all know the massive bushfires that are raging around the world. And it's a decisive issue in the recent election. So it's front of mind like it's never been before.
Correct.
populations are still climbing, so we still need to provide housing. Believe it or not, as of Tuesday this week, the global population hit 8 billion people, and it grew by 7 billion people in the last 200 years alone. Now that is starting to peter out, and it will hit a cap and start to decline ever so slightly. But it does mean that, you know, we're growing, we're becoming older, but then that next generation is also coming through. So yeah, it's an impact on food security, poverty, in addition to the climate crisis. So there is some good news in that as well. That's kind of the bad stuff. The good stuff is, and this is really coming out of the pandemic, we're finding people are reconnecting with their local community. During lockdown, we were forced to live local. We had no choice. So people have been more aware and tuned to the offering of their local neighbourhood, their offering of their local community. And we're finding that in apartment sales, the projects that are doing really well are those in a great location, in a great local neighbourhood and community, and those that can help build that sense of neighbourhood and community as well.
Well, I think that's also particularly true because the working from home scenario, right?
Absolutely.
So working from home means that people actually now having their lunch in their local, you know, eatery rather than in the city.
And we've got some research that our global research into workplace culture has done, which highlights how much people are working from home. So I'll share that later. We've had more control over over our lives, where we can live, where we want to live. We can work from home more often. We can pick the kids up. We can, you know, but also we can work regionally. Interestingly, we saw that real swift shift and rise in market values to regional areas. This is Bendigo here, and why wouldn't you want to work from here? It's beautiful. However, linked to the climate crisis, we're seeing some of the regional areas among the fastest declining in property values at the moment. So it's kind of it's not an all a positive story in the region. There are certain risks and challenges with fire and flood and cyclones and so on. So it needs to be balanced. There is a pushback to cities, but we can live where we want to now, and we can work however we want to in that hybrid scenario.
It certainly has given us much more flexibility, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. We've discovered our loved green spaces. So the importance of having a park nearby, having somewhere to walk the dogs, having somewhere to sit outside and get fresh air and greenery and access to nature. And we know that the ideal home listed the backyard as a top priority, outdoor entertainment areas, balconies, and the housing location being close to local parks or shops or the beach were also highly figured. And I know that also figured in some of your research, which we've got later in the pack as well, Sam.
Well, certainly walkability is key, you know, and we actually believe that with the walkability, we actually will see the less need for traffic in terms of obviously cars, and that's going to be a major impact in the future as well, isn't it?
Yep. So it seems that everything is pointing towards sustainability. It's one of the key themes we're seeing, that how do we build carbon positive, not just carbon neutral, carbon positive housing, because cost of living has an impact from energy prices and energy use. Even the market is wanting more sustainability because of these fires and floods. And we also saw during the pandemic, when we turned off our cars, when we didn't travel as much, that parts of the environment healed. The Amazon started to repair, the pollution levels started to drop. So we know that what we are doing is having an impact. That's been proven now, and people are more sensitive to it. So there is innovation in that space as well, which I think is a good thing. So I'll try to flick through these pretty quickly, just to give you a broader context. At Hassell, we are multi-sectoral and global in focus. So some of our research into the cities impacts our work into housing. So Urbis did a survey of the national leaders of city organisations, both public and private. What they found is that the themes we've just referred to are the four main key themes that came head and shoulders above the others in terms of cities' futures. So economic growth and competitiveness is still important. not surprisingly, more important to the private sector than the public sector. Managing population, demographic change, equally important. Tackling climate change, very important to both private and public. And adapting to the changes brought about by COVID. And we know that Australia's future is still a nation of cities. So attracting both people and investment. So it's not only about the returns, but attracting people to our cities is important. Cities and urban places, the only way they can get resilience is through diversification. So airports, universities, big box retail precincts that were monotypological really suffered under the pandemic. This is a education precinct master plan we've done in the UK, where bringing students, residents on site, having community use, retail use, and really opening the university gated community of a university to the city is the way that they can make a better place, but it makes more investment sense because it diversifies their risk in the face of a crisis.
I think that's a very smart thing.
Socially oriented neighbourhoods that are holistic and self-sufficient. I think this is to do with not only the Keep It Local movement and neighbourhood and the importance of community, but celebrating cultural diversity and bringing in all the different elements of our community: aging in place, intergenerational living, affordable housing, social housing, community facilities, and the 15-minute city. It really, again, makes financial sense as well as making best kind of places for people. And finally, we need to activate, attract and retain through experiential destinations. So we need to give people reasons to want to go to places and want to stay at places. That's happening more and more in the residential sector as there's more and more precinct-based residential developments. That gives a sense of scale where you can create sticky spaces that people want to go to and want to stay at, and therefore that increases the value of apartments that are owned, but also it retains rental stock in built-to-rent developments through experiential destinations.
Well, and we certainly found that through COVID, people still actually wanted that common space just as much as ever before, because it was about the breakout spaces, right?
Yep.
And so rooftop, kind of like entertainment areas certainly have been a really strong focus, especially in recent times.
Yep.
But like you're talking about, this is also within those village precincts.
Within the cities as well, the same is the case. And we did some research out of our UK studio, what makes a great urban place. And there were 6 qualities of great urban places: places that are naturally regenerative, that are openly networked, that are playfully dynamic, beautifully original, conveniently compact, and richly diverse. So these are the characteristics we think of great urban places into the future.
Interesting.
What does it mean for our offices? That's obviously a very big topic, and we've got a large a sector that deals solely with this. So people are working at home, they're working from the office, but the predominant mode across all of our geographies is hybrid working. So whether it be at home, whether it be at the office, whether it be out in the city, as you say, Sam. So that's almost half of people's work life now is a hybrid balance of working.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. The office is becoming more like the home. When we asked workers, and this is, staff in the number of tenancies that we work on globally, once it's safe to return, what features do you most want to see in your company's office? And the results are, you can see things that are related to the home are in purple, things that are related to the outside are kind of in green, but also people want a free lunch, they want food, they want to feel like they're at home, they want fresh air, they want gardens, good coffee, enough space to focus without distraction. So that kind of flexibility and in the workplace, a private gym that, because people are used to now working out at lunch, and a space to take a nap because people might. So the workplace is becoming more like the home, and arguably elements of the home are becoming more like the office because it's kind of blurring.
Well, we're finding that certainly the need for that study nook or a spare study space is growing and growing all the time.
Yep. So we've looked at a model that we call the magnetic workplace, which is about knowing your people and finding the features that appeal to your specific demographic and what they want to come to the office for. They don't have to come in anymore. So you can't, I mean, you can tell them to come in, but it's not having great results with the likes of Tesla and
Google.
and Twitter. But if you make it somewhere desirable that people want to come in, and then they will come in. So yeah, the magnetic workplace is what we're calling that.
That's a beautiful definition.
The office is more integrated as a community hub, and that caters for that hybrid working. So bringing in elements of the community into the building. This is 60 Martin Place that has co-working, but also has kind of a civic room as a part of its lobby. So the lobby is not a private experience, it's a civic experience connected to the community, a whole lot of retail and a whole lot of cafe spaces in and up on top of the building. And a more adaptive and fluid office. So again, with hybrid working here to stay, the future of the office must be adaptive and fluid. It feels a bit more like a cafe, like the home with the plants inside. There are places where you can just, like I'm right now in a little nook that has a beautiful view out with some greenery and so on, but I've got the acoustic padded walls. So it's quiet enough for me to focus and get what I want to get done in this particular session.
Where's the sleep pod? That's what I want to know.
Now, this is where we start to get serious. What does this mean for our homes? We think the role of our homes has changed. Flexibility, people, sustainability, and community are front and center. Some of those things are the things that we've touched on already. So some of the stats and the trends, migration and demand are returning. So during COVID, between June 2020 and September 21, Australia as a whole lost 110,000 people in its population. People returned to Australia between the end of last year and the middle of this year, 124,000 people. And in January, that increased the highest population growth of Australia since 1981. So, the population is coming back, migration is coming back, and we need to be ready for it. And my sense is we're currently not as a market. So there's definitely room for improvement there. The rental market, we all know, is in high demand. Rents are 10% growing since September 2022. And the national vacancies are falling, and they're about 0.9% nationally at the moment. It's interesting, for the first time, people are starting to talk about whether rents will become more expensive than owning again.
Well, if it does, that will obviously rebalance the whole end spectrum, won't it?
So we need to be, there's a big focus on build to rent because of these metrics. And our view is that we need to be careful not to fleece the golden goose, so to speak, because if rents get too expensive, then that could also be a problem for the sector longer term.
Well, definitely, especially considering the quick succession we've had with the interest rates going up, right?
Yes.
And no abatement for that. Coming into a Christmas, New Year period, it's going to be very interesting how that plays out. And we certainly have seen that in terms of rental. Like, it just doesn't seem to be stopping, does it, at the moment, in terms of growth?
No, the sales market. So we all know there's doom and gloom out there of sales values, clearance rates, and so on. When we take a bit of a step back from all of the doom and gloom of, yes, dwelling values reduced by the largest quarterly decline since the 1980s at 4.1% in a quarter in September. But when you look at the annual dwelling values, they still increased since the end of last year by 1.7%. And they're still 22.4% to January 2022. So that was a cyclical peak. You can see on the top graph in terms of the dwelling sales actually went up through COVID and is now coming back down. It's still above the 5-year average of dwelling sales value. And the clearance rates are still high, and they're still, you know, at average levels. They're, yeah.
We certainly seem to have had a peak about January, February, maybe this year as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, the clearance rates are going up. So supply, this is the graph I mentioned before. The black on the right there is the housing starts construction, which are declining and predicted to further decline. But the apartment starts since the end of last year are actually increasing. So we are building more homes than we were last year, and that's a good thing. And that's only going up from the forecast from HIA. But we're still forecast, the HIA, which is a little bit more independent, arguably, we're still forecast to fall 35,000 homes short of the 1 million homes announced as a target from the Australian government. So there's definitely room for more supply in the market. Arguably, planning approvals and timelines through that process need to be addressed in order to help that.
Well, and resourcing, you know, human resources as well. So,
yep. And this is what you mentioned earlier, Sam. There are tight markets. It's a discerning market. There's, you know, obviously challenges in the China real estate sector, which no doubt have global implications. There's interest rates. There's builders falling over left, right, and centre, and there are supply chain and delay factors that are having an impact on cost. As I said, there are innovative builders out there that are finding creative ways around that, but it's making that construction process to delivery challenging in some states more than others.
So what kind of innovation are we seeing out there, Jeremy?
We're looking at builders that are trying to get ahead, and there's a lot more early contractor involvement that's happening on a trade-by-trade basis. We're looking at early tendering for facade packages because there are long lead times, and some of that is from different markets. So if we're not relying on a China supply of facade, we can get that from Indonesia, we can get that from Dubai, we can get that from India. There are other markets out there trying to fill that gap. And fundamentally, this is the exciting thing from our perspective, I think, is that the Great Australian Dream is changing. It's taking its time, but you know, that traditional Great Australian Dream of the picket fence, the house, and ownership is changing. The metrics around apartments versus housing are changing. People want to live where they want to live in that community, in that neighbourhood. And if that means they can't afford a house, then they're looking at apartments. And there are different models of innovation, which I'll touch on, that are providing better housing choice and better housing options. And then there is the shift from an ownership mentality to a renting mentality, and quality build to rent developers out there that are providing that as a real alternative to long-term rental, which has been the norm in Europe for decades. This is some of your wonderful work, Sam, in terms of what are the new expectations for our home, and that research of 3,600 apartment residents found that, you know, COVID has not abated apartment owners and renters' appetite for apartment living. It also finds that it had a positive impact on some apartment residents that wanted to live in their apartment still. Some of them wouldn't change a thing about their current apartment. 1/3 said that they want facilities and or amenities, places to connect, where they is what they liked about where they live. And another 1/3 said that it was extremely, very or moderately important to know your neighbours. And another 1/3 cited the quality of their apartment build as what they like. So yeah, that quality issue is very front of mind.
I wouldn't know why. I think it's because some of the work that we've been doing anyway, but I think quality should always, and it's interesting, I was having a conversation with Mo the other day about their build to rent. And, you know, they do things like double glazing and extended warranty on their, you know, kind of like, what do you call them, the things that they put, the ovens and dishwashers they put into their apartments. And I said to them, why don't you do that for the people who are buying as well? Because, you know, the developer is saying, but will the buyer pay for it? But what we're finding is, yes, they will.
Yeah. So this slide talks to neighbourhood amenity, and this is again from our office research work. The purple is the percentage of people that we surveyed that are spending 0% of their workday in the office. So you can see on a Monday is more than 1/3 of people are not spending any time in the office. And on a Friday, even more, 40% of people. That's that's a lot of people that are not in the office. And then those bits in between, that hybrid work stream again. So whether that be some time in the office, sometime in a cafe, or sometime in meetings, or sometime at home, they're either in their neighborhoods more than they traditionally had been, or they're at home more than they previously had been. So we think that points to the importance of the neighborhood amenity, with people spending more time there.
I agree.
And less time in the office. And we think the future is quality housing with humanity. And we see this is a growing trend. And there are some developers that are just going from strength to strength that have been doing this for a while. And a lot of other developers that are catching up and changing what they have been doing to meet this demand of quality housing with humanity, housing for people. So 4 trends in future-proofing of apartments. Creating community is a theme that we've discussed a fair bit already. Build to rent is having a big impact, as many of you, all of you will know, but there are other new models of housing which is driving sustainability and driving innovation and really responding to that changing profile of the Great Australian Dream, but also providing housing choice, which is really exciting. So that's what I think, coming out of the challenges that we have in the resi market, the fact that there are increasing number of housing alternatives out there is a good thing. A flight to quality, we've also touched on a fair bit, and obviously there's a lot of technology that's changing, and that is having an impact on our home. We'll touch on some of those. So creating community. We must create those strong communities and environments. They need to be socially oriented. The truly integrated mix of housing that we spoke about before. They need commercial and public uses. Equitable housing access. The vulnerable are missing out. It's really important, and some developers are trying to deal with this. Intergenerational living is important, and we need to acknowledge that our built environment impacts physical and mental well-being. There's a loneliness pandemic and a mental health pandemic out there as well. So we design human-centric homes and places to provide places for people to connect. There's a heightened demand for human connection and community. As I said, this was a competition scheme we did in Collingwood in Melbourne, and what we did is turn the rooftop garden on top of the podium in this building into a community garden, a public park, Melbourne's largest elevated green space. And that meant that the apartments weren't subsidising that rooftop amenity. It was actually being paid for by the community and by some of the commercial impacts. So the gym was commercial, the pool was commercial, members of the public could go there. So it wasn't only a gated community for the residents, but the residents then are connected to their community, and it becomes a bit of an Instagram moment where you're inviting the local community up and into and onto the apartments. So it lowers the ongoing maintenance costs, but it welcomes the community into the residential development.
Well, I think that's smart. It's a bit like what you're talking about with the university, right? You don't have to be a gated community, so to speak. The idea is that you're part of a community.
Yeah, absolutely. Then this was some research again out of the UK, where the 15-minute neighbourhood is a really strong theme that's coming through in their planning requirements. And whether it's rural or urban, neighbourhood amenity matters, and having that 15-minute walkability will lower our carbon footprints and make for more sustainable cities, but again, make for more enjoyable cities.
Well, and now, you know, when we think about the future, all our health will be monitored by our watches and so forth. So
Yes.
you know, the idea about that 15-minute city is that you can actually get out and about and enjoy it as well. And so it's good for your health too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's that attraction, that destination that will draw people. And that's where, you know, cities and workplaces interfaces with the residential sector. This was a Communities Plus bid that we worked on with Frasers and a number of architects in Sydney, and it was successful for Frasers. It's a mix of housing. So the master plan in the bottom left corner shows the different typologies of apartments and uses within that master plan. So it is a real mix of housing types. But there was also a public school that was proposed by the developer, and public parks and so on. But it also dragged in this kind of creek environment you can see in the render below to the right, dragged that through some ecology corridors through into the development to provide a more resilient and a better environment for the community. So it becomes a community plus an excellent school, plus beautiful open spaces, plus kind of tailored support and mixed housing.
Well, it's a complete wraparound. And, you know, we have for a long time, we've actually thought, I was in Hamilton the other day in Brisbane. I don't know if you've been there, Jeremy, but it's just like there's been a group of developers who've just built their buildings with no sense of connectivity or kind of like theming, or, you know, it's on the ocean, well, on the river, for goodness sake. You know what I mean? There's so much potential to have done a great precinct there. And what we don't do is we don't think about precincts. We just think about individual buildings, don't we?
Yeah. Yep. So we have an aging population. The stat below in the bottom right corner was the staggering one. I found that by 2041, Australia will have another 200% of centenarians, people aged over 100. It's, you know, we need to provide dignity to our seniors in our community that have given so much to us. And this was a development we did in WA, Kringle Green. It's actually on Gardening Australia tomorrow night for those who tune in. And, you know, there has been a Royal Commission into aged care. It is a challenging sector, but it is a sector that there is a market there for providing quality and providing dignity to our aging people, and integrating that into the community as well. This one has play spaces and community spaces that again connect the residents with the broader community.
Even got a chicken pen. And
that's right.
The reason
you've seen this one, haven't you, Sam?
Yeah, well, we won one of our awards, and the reason why it's on Gardening Australia tomorrow is because Josh Byrne was one of our judges. So he actually picked a number of our projects and promoted them onto the Gardening Australia, which is great that we're providing fodder.
And this one we would have, hopefully many of us would have seen Old Person's Home for 4-year-olds and Old Person's Home for teenagers recently. A beautiful story that the connection and the value that both of the 4-year-olds and the teenagers got from the seniors, but also that the seniors got from that connection back to the earlier generations. So the development on the right there is another one in WA that has a childcare centre integrated within a development that also has aged living units. So that there is that direct connection between the older residents and the aged care facilities, and direct programs and so on that kind of link those together. So intergenerational communities, again, provide a diversity of revenue streams which make financial sense, but also just make better places for people.
Well, and I know, in fact, one of the residents at Queensley actually goes next door to Nagala and actually volunteers, you know, 2 or 3 times a week. And, you know, it's great because in this busy day and age, you know, children might not see their grandparents very often, but it's always nice to have a relationship with an older person who's got more time for you than your parents.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Build to rent and the new models driving sustainability and innovation. So we mentioned the Great Australian Dream is changing. First home buyers are finding alternative pathways to ownership with affordable options in amenity-rich areas, close to good coffee, of course, and public transport. the disruption models like Nightingale's sustainable communities that you see here, Assemble's build to rent to own, and there's another group called the Property Collectives, which has citizen-led housing, where they get the residents first that become a co-developer to develop something in the model of what they actually want. So they're changing the game, and they're providing housing alternatives, and private developers are now having to keep up because they're being compared against these innovative new models.
Well, I think, you know, simple is better sometimes, Jeremy, right?
Yep.
And I think this is what it comes back to with housing choice, right?
Yep.
Is that, you know, not everybody wants a 1.8 million, you know, with soft closing drawers kind of apartment with views of the river. Some people just would like to have a simple kind of like location, which is comfortable in a good community, close to where they need to shop and to drop their kids off to school and so forth. So I think, you know, and that's the one thing I love about the awards is you actually do get to see, when we talk about housing choice, it's not just about houses versus standalone versus apartments, it's also housing choice within that apartment.
So then there's build to rent and co-living, which I'll touch on as well. And the interesting thing about all of these models, the theme that they have is sustainability. So they are driving innovation in sustainability, and commercial developers and build to sell developers are just having to keep up. Otherwise, they're being priced out. So build to rent to own, Assemble communities. Most of you will know what this is about. The residents get to rent for up to 5 years, and then they get the option to purchase the apartment they've been renting. So it's almost a try before you buy, but it is a way of getting people into the home ownership market sooner. And you kind of have to prove that it's somewhere where they're going to want to live in those first 5 years to convert those sales. So in order to do that, they also provide a free financial counsellor to the residents for that 5-year period and beyond, to help their financial literacy, help their situation, to help them into the housing market.
It's sustainable.
Yeah, and there is a high level of sustainability. So because that's what the first home buyers want. So Nightingale Village is just finished. What I find fascinating about these is they are so popular. They're in such demand, but they have 0 car parks. Imagine that. We've all worked with developers where we've got, you know, 1-for-1 car parks because that's what the market wants. Well, this part of the market doesn't want that, and they save so much money by not building basements and building bike parks and, you know, retail units on ground floor. They have the washing machine on the top floor, and they have no air conditioning, but they have ceiling fans. So there are different ways of doing things, and the market can respond. So it doesn't have to be what your sales agent tells you it has to be, because that's what they sold the last development at. It requires a bit of interrogation.
Well, we believe every suburb has its own traits, right? So what might work in an upmarket suburb is definitely not going to work within a CBD or a more price-sensitive market. So you just got to be conscious of that. And if you're a prolific developer and you like to have a taste of different portfolios, which is healthy, then this is certainly an area of growth, isn't it?
Well, the other thing that is relevant about that, and it's relevant in build to rent as well, these developments tend to have more real customer data that is driving the characteristics of the development. So I know in the build to rent to own, they're building and taking note of what the residents want, and that feeds into what they actually provide. And that's what set Nightingale apart from others, was they did something different based on what they thought the market wanted based on their research, and it was found to have a really untapped market. And build to rent is doing the same thing. There's a lot of metrics around operational build to rent apartments, which facilities get used and which don't. It's one of my favorite parts of build to rent. Gone are the days where build to sell is about selling a render of a communal space and what looks good to sell. And it doesn't matter whether it's actually what is going to get used in the end, because once it's sold and the developer's gone in many cases. Build to rent, if you provide what they want, they will stay. If you provide something that's not used, it's just expensive to upkeep.
Well, market-led design is the way to go, isn't it? Right? Because as we actually see apartment living actually dominate the landscape more and more, what we're going to have to do is actually then customize. And from our research, the customization was very important. And for those who didn't have it, they'll want it. So there's these kind of like, situations where if you don't adapt and evolve, you will get left behind.
Yep. We know that Australia has more renters than ever before, and it's growing. Apparently 30% of apartment residents are renting. So that's pretty significant. And we know that there's more and more build to rent units around. It's now operational in Sydney, Perth, Brisbane, Melbourne, and the Gold Coast. And there are increased rental returns in some of those operational models that exist now. We've done some work with Mirvac in how their Live Indigo is starting to perform, and interestingly, they're finding, because of the amount of amenity space, that some people are choosing to rent a smaller apartment, like instead of a 2-bed for a couple that might traditionally want the space of a 2-bedroom apartment, they can live in a 1-bedroom apartment because they've got the larger dining room, they've got the larger gym, they've got the larger shared spaces that they can use for that extra space in their apartment. And that makes it a little bit cheaper for them. Yeah, size is changing when you have the right amenity mix.
And that definitely got driven by the whole COVID scenario, was the size, right? And more ability to actually stay in the apartment for longer.
Yep. And we're seeing different metrics with size, which we'll touch on in a minute. Build to rent supports aging in place. You'll be surprised at how many older people might not want to live in an aged care facility, but might want to live in a low maintenance build to rent where someone does all the other stuff and they get to live in the community with younger people. So it does support aging in place. It also is family friendly. So some build to rent includes childcare facilities, kids playrooms in Live Indigo. So it can be a family friendly environment as well.
Well, it should be 10% of our apartment owners are families. You talk about a socially oriented development. I would like to have a family oriented development. I think, and these kinds of like play spaces are very important.
Yes.
And preferably not on a rooftop.
Well, it can be on a rooftop, but and then
good fencing.
Yes. They can strengthen community with communal rooftops and veggie gardens. So this was a competition again we did in Perth for Assemble Build to Rent, and that had the idea of rooftop beehives to create honey and chickens for eggs, and rooftop gardens, and that mobility hub that as people drive less, putting above ground parking actually makes sense because it can be converted later on.
Yeah, exactly. And adaptability of spaces is key at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. The next level amenities. This is a project by Brookfield in New York that has even an indoor basketball court and rock climbing. It's next level. It's a race for amenity in the US in the build to rent multifamily space.
I think that's great. And why would you want to even leave home?
That's right. Maker spaces and tool libraries and bike repair kits, so people can make things and have that shed type facility and amenity. There are build to rent brands that are kind of focused on that element of creating places for people and kind of that amenity that people want.
I think it's awesome.
It's even perfect for your best friend. I know this is my best friend is 2 dogs, and it's been one of the barriers that when we bought our house, we were lucky enough that we could, back when we did, was a place to have a pet and rules around having pets. And most build to rent operators know this. It's a barrier to apartment living for a lot of people. And so their rules are pet friendly. They have pet washing facilities, they have pet walking, dog walking clubs, and they're really actually promoting it as a benefit of build to rent.
It's a selling point. And we know ourselves that, a dog can actually be a major icebreaker in that lift, right?
It can, yes. If you're carrying it so that it can go downstairs and do its wee or poo, yes. Size does matter. So it's interesting in the build to rent space, we're seeing a trend towards slightly more compact living, which is counteracted by the amenity offerings. And that's most acute in the next slide in co-living, where it's a form of build to rent. If you go to the next slide, sorry, Sam. Yeah, the co-living is a form of build to rent where people want to live in the share economy, and it's an alternative housing model where within a neighborhood of like-minded people, where private space is traded off for more shared space. So they have smaller private spaces, but larger and more shared spaces. So, and this is maybe not for me, maybe not for you, Sam, but there are the next generation coming through want to live in a different way. Their expectations are different. And again, coming out of the pandemic, they want to share spaces. They want to be in a community. They want it to be vibrant. So yeah, we're finding, we know that UCO that operate a lot of co-living out of Sydney just cannot build these things fast enough. They are just full up and they have a long waiting list.
Well, I think you're totally right in your bottom point as well on the right-hand side. In fact, people are not getting married as young as they used to. And, if they are actually working from home a lot, they don't have the work community they used to do. So now they need to rely on their home community to fill that space as well.
It's again that housing choice. So this development on the left here was in Fitzroy, just down the road from the St Vincent's Hospital, and we actively spoke with the developer and some co-living operators about nurses that might want to live here instead of living a 1.5 hour commute out. Now they can't afford massive rents, but they could afford a smaller space within Fitzroy that has all of the amenity of Fitzroy, but a whole lot of shared spaces so they could still entertain friends, they could still do yoga on the rooftop, they could still plant their own veggies in the veggie patch on the northern terrace on level 4. And they can choose to live in a different way for a different price. And these are more a 3-month rent. So you become a member and then you can live in different units, in different spots, in different parts of that community. It's a bit more flexible in the way that you want to live.
That's awesome. Like hot desking, but hot housing.
Yeah. So this is a big one for you, Sam, I know, and a big one that we're finding again and again. And as I mentioned, a flight to quality. So this is the Harbourside development that Hassell and Snøhetta are doing with Mirvac, Darling Harbour in Sydney. And it's a really interesting, now obviously it's a premium location and these are going to be premium apartments, the premium end of the market, but there's some really fantastic trends appearing out of this development, larger apartments, 2-bed apartments that are 110 square metres, 3 beds that are 130 minimum, up to 180, I think. So there are larger apartments full of amenity and people are starting to pay that because that's what they want in that owner-occupier market. And it becomes then a real alternative to a detached home, but right on the doorstep of the city.
And what we're seeing is that they're actually now accommodating formal dining spaces and actually hallways. And so, in fact, what we're seeing,
dedicated entry is a big thing. People don't want to walk straight into the living room. They also want to have a dedicated study nook with a nice backdrop for their Zoom meetings. And a lot of baths are coming back. So yeah, slightly bigger balconies and making sure they're functional. So yeah, this that flight to quality we're really seeing coming through.
Yeehaw.
We all know why. There've been some disasters, and that's really resulted in a crisis of confidence in apartments and in development and in the construction sector as a whole. And we all have a responsibility to do everything we can to build confidence back in the sector.
It's totally, you're on the money here, Jeremy, because I'm hearing from real estate agents it's taking between 6 to 10 visits before someone will actually buy off the plan. That there's expectation we've seen in New South Wales with our research from 2019 to 2021, that the confidence levels to buy off the plan dropped from 17% to 9%. And if you think about most developers needing 60% pre-sales, that's going to definitely leave a crisis if you don't deal with this quality matter.
Absolutely. There's the unofficial apartment ombudsman, Sam. And I think they've really given voice to apartment residents, apartment owners, and championed that the sector needs to improve in order to really make the most of this as a viable housing alternative.
Well, it's going to be a dominating part of how we live as we move forward. So it needs to actually be a safe choice, Yep.
And legislation is changing. There's been a big change in New South Wales coming out of it, and equally challenging and changing forces in other jurisdictions. So we can't avoid it, and we need to, as an industry, get on board and make sure that we're delivering quality apartments as a viable alternative to our future, our housing future.
Need to embrace it, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So this is another owner-occupier targeted development that is trying to or delivering, will deliver on that kind of flight to quality. Otter Place by Milieu. It's the design office is the interior designer, and that was that rooftop view that we saw before. So that development there is really saw they also had larger 2-bed apartments. They had some down at the 75 to 80 square meters, but most of them were actually 110 square meters as well for the 2 beds. And that rooftop box above has 2 apartments per level that are 3-bed, larger, beautiful homes for people that's integrated into Collingwood. And one of the innovations in this one was a precast glazed brick snap podium base was changed out for real bricks, because we need to rethink some of the ways that we've been building things in the last few years, and what might have been more expensive 5 years ago might now be cheaper than doing it a different way.
That's interesting. And certainly we know from our research that people are preferring a textured look to a building rather than just a concrete slab as well.
Yeah. So I'm conscious we've got about a few minutes left. I'll whip through technology and how it's changing our homes. Let's just crack straight into it, I think. Online shopping has changed the home. People are buying their groceries online. They're buying online shopping. It's Black Friday on this Friday, and workplaces are struggling to keep up with this. But it is fundamentally, if you go to the next slide, fundamentally changing our lobbies, changing our mail rooms, changing our storage areas to incorporate lockers that are refrigerated lockers for the food delivery, but also parcel lockers for those parcel deliveries. And we're seeing an increase in concierge desks as well. So it is changing how we need to consider our apartment design.
And storage.
Well, this is the click and collect lockers, but also the refrigerated lockers. Allowances for drone drop-offs on the roof, we're seeing coming through in a few apartments. It's not required, but some are doing it, some are not. This is watch this space, I think.
Exactly.
The removal of gas, that was a big topic this week with gas cooktops. It's not a requirement to remove gas, but as we move towards carbon net zero by 2050, we can't do that with gas. And taking gas out of development puts an increased demand on substations and electrical supply. So that needs to be considered and factored in when we're making that decision. And we think there'll be innovation in the space of substation design. Traditionally, the authorities that manage that process keep a tight lid on it. They're going to have to move, and they're going to have to provide more supply within those same spaces.
And and some of those buildings are going to actually, I saw the other day, Picker actually was doing a bulk buy for their larger stratas, and so they could actually access the solar energy from a solar farm in the middle of the desert, get a reduction in their cost for power, and not pay for infrastructure. So there's all these kinds of things that can be done if you think slightly outside.
It doesn't always make sense to provide your own power supply, green power supply on site. If you can guarantee and partner with solar farms in the country, and that can achieve the same thing and support our net zero by 2050. So substation electrical supply is amplified by EVs that require charging. There's a spatial impact you can see here, but we have seen examples of more compact retrofits within existing car parks, so it can be done. We're also, so Harbourside has provision within its substation allowances for no gas, but it also has provision for 98% of the car parks provided, and there's quite a few, to have EVs fitted. Some developers are really making allowance for this, because if you don't, it's hard to retrofit a larger substation, as I'm sure you can all appreciate.
Correct.
So plan it in now.
Yeah, as of next year with the National Construction Codes, you'll have to, won't you?
Yep, because if you think about it, the companies are phasing out provision of anything that's not an EV before 2030. So by 2035, I think people are saying the majority of cars will be EVs. We need to allow for that now. Rideshare apps and car share schemes also have a spatial impact. This is a car share that's an electric vehicle car share, and that car share company runs and manages this, so very minimal cost to the developer. They've got a captive audience of the residents in the apartments. So there are, again, innovative ways to minimise your costs but maximise the benefit to the residents.
Clever.
And the increasing demand for cycling. So that comes with cycling parks, but also cycle repair shops, facilities, cycling clubs, and so on. So it can actually add to the amenity of the development.
Yes, middle-aged men in Lycra, darling.
The old mammal. This was that mobility hub I mentioned. This is an incredible development in Miami that looks at car parks that are not car parks. So this is a home, this is an art gallery, this is an office, this is an event space. And it means that when less people drive, it can also be converted into other things. So above ground parking doesn't have to look bad, and it doesn't have to be a planning challenge. It can even equally future-proof a development.
Correct.
And hotel-like porte cocheres and drop-off zones are really the best way we've seen to manage and mitigate these changing forces to our movement patterns.
Well, that's right, because very soon we won't actually want to even own a car, really. We'll just be doing, like you say, the kind of like share vehicle. And a lot of companies who provide embedded networks or provide EV charging stations will also provide that kind of, car, I guess, pool for people to utilise within the building as well. So
and our devices are everywhere, but they can also be cleverly integrated. So we're seeing more and more apartments as a standard have an integrated phone charger integrated into the kitchen benchtop, so you can just drop your phone on the thing and leave it there, and it charges while you're not using it. Same with other devices. Rather than having cords and cables everywhere, there's got to be a better way. We've got to think about these things. We can't, we can integrate them and make it more seamless.
I think that would be mandatory with my teenagers, I'm telling you.
Absolutely. Every room, maybe. So, in closing, we think the future is bright, and that we're optimistic about the future. It's challenging, but if you get it right, if you design quality places and places for people, then we think that there's positive signs that we have housing choice and housing alternatives, and great places for people to live.
Absolutely. And I think that's important, is that, you know, as we move forward, that apartments are not seen as being of a lesser choice. They are seen as being a preferred choice across a diverse demographic range. And that for us, you know, is the fight that we keep pushing, is that, you know, don't pigeonhole an apartment owner, because there's many different types of apartment owners out there, as you and I both know, Jeremy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for your time, and sorry we've gone 4 minutes over, but we did start a few minutes late. Hopefully there was some interest in there.
I am sure there was. And if you have any questions, please, in the chat button at the top, you actually be able to pop something in there if there's anything that you would like to ask Jeremy. Otherwise, what we'll do is when we send out the copy of the recording, if you want Jeremy's details to talk about this further, then obviously please do so. Obviously, Hassell is one of our sponsors. These are our national sponsors here. So, certainly we have had a great relationship with Hassell, and certainly they've been involved with our education kit in New South Wales and also WA. So we're very grateful for their time and for their insight, because they always have something interesting to say. Thank you, Jolie. She said thank you for what we've just been talking about. We appreciate that. Any last thoughts then, Jeremy, before we ring off, so to speak?
Oh, I think I've done enough talking for one day. But yeah, thank you to everyone, and good luck out there in the challenging environment we have in creating great places for people and being champions of quality apartment living and housing choice, housing diversity. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It needs to be customized housing outcomes for different people for what they need.
Correct. And certainly you're championing that. So thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for the Hassell staff. As always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. And I guess what we'll be doing now is actually saying Merry Christmas. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it.
That's why I'm wearing my Santa jacket.
I think I still have 6 months worth of work to do. But anyway, so if I don't see you beforehand, have a great Christmas and New Year. We'll see you back here in 2023. Got a great year's worth of calendar events we're putting together. So thanks again for everybody for joining in, and thank you, Jeremy, for your time today. Much appreciated.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye now.
Goodbye.